This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com welcoming you back to the New World Next Week. And joining me on the line, as always, is the host and webmaster of MediaMonarchy.com, James Evan Pilato. James, thank you very much for joining me again today.
Thanks so much, man. I'm really enjoying doing this each week. This is our third one, and yeah, better every time.
Absolutely. Well, let's get straight into it then. Tell us what's our first story today.
Our first story today is surprising, although it shouldn't be at this point. NASA Pentagon scientist arrested for attempted Israeli spying. And we add this to the long list of other exposed Israeli spy cases involving folks like Larry Franklin, Jonathan Pollard, Stephen Rosen, Keith Weissman. And what I want to throw out before we get into this story from Wikinews is that in this 10-minute time frame that we have, we're not going to get into all the information, but what we provide on the websites is the essential, supplemental, and contextual information that you can go and do the research for yourself. So having said that, from wikinews.org, NASA Pentagon scientist arrested for attempted Israeli spying, Stuart Nozette, N-O-Z-E-T-T-E, Stuart Nozette, 52 years old, from Chevy Chase, Maryland, was arrested on Monday on charges of espionage. He had a court hearing on Tuesday, and he is accused of spying for Israel. He got his PhD from MIT. He worked at Lawrence Livermore. He started a company called Alliance for Competitive Technology, but he also worked for NASA and the Department of Defense. And I even found out a little bit after we had posted this story that Stuart Nozette even ties into NASA's recent work on trying to discover water on the moon. So again, a lot more information swirls around this. But essentially, an undercover FBI agent pretending to be an Israeli intelligence officer confronted Nozette on September 3rd, 2009. So the wheels of justice seem suspiciously moving very quickly in this case. On September 3rd of this year, they confronted Nozette and asked him for government information. Later that day, Nozette confirmed his willingness to give the officer classified material in exchange for money and an Israeli passport. During another meeting with the same undercover FBI officer, Nozette pointed out that he no longer had access to classified documents, but he might be able to recall more information from them, I'm sure, if the money and other benefits kept flowing to him. The fact that this ties in with the recent stories of the NASA missions and bombing the moon and the search for water, again, shows you how amazingly connected so many of these stories are.
Absolutely, and on one other note, I guess we should just mention that this also ties into a related story that you posted up, art students in WTC connected to Israeli intelligence service, a very interesting new bit of reporting from Jonathan Elenoff of Truth Alliance. But moving right along, I guess if today's theme is spying and intelligence services, what's story number 2? I guess it comes from cyberspacewar.com.
It does. Cyberspacewar.com. This came out yesterday, this by way of the Danger Room blog on Wired. CIA to monitor internet chatter for anti-government sentiment. America's spy agencies want to read your blog posts, keep track of your Twitter tweets, and even check out your book reviews on Amazon. in-q-tel, 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 the investment arm of the CIA and the whole wider intelligence community, is putting a bunch of cash into a company called Visible Technologies. They specialize in monitoring social media. This is part of a larger movement within the spy services to get better at using open source intelligence. And I think this is something that speaks to the work that we try and do within the alternative media world. Information that's publicly available but often hidden in the flood of TV shows, newspaper articles, blog posts, online videos, and radio reports generated every day. Visible Technologies crawls over 500,000 Web 2.0 sites every day, scraping more than 1 million posts and conversations taking place on blogs, forums, Flickr, YouTube, Twitter, Amazon. It does not, it's worth noting, touch closed social networks like Facebook at the moment. Customers, in this case, the spooks, get real-time feeds of what's being said on these sites based on a series of keywords.
Exactly, and I think the story behind the story here is that we know that in-q-tel, for example, was one of the arms that was used to help set up Facebook. So again, we have a Facebook CIA link, and we know that, for example, Admiral Poindexter, who was convicted of lying to Congress during the Iran-Contra affair, surfaced in 2002 to introduce the Total Information Awareness Office, which was specifically designed to try to collect as much information as it could on every human being on the planet using transactional financial data. And then, of course, just a couple years later, the CIA ends up founding a social networking site, and then now they're funding other companies to invent software to scrape this information off and collect it on everyone. So it all ties in a myriad of ways, and it even ties in, amazingly enough, to story number 3, which you posted as a related link to episode 103 of the Corbett Report.
That's right. Under episode 103, the Smart Grid Cometh, this was an update after you had released the show. This coming from the threat level blog on Wired. Medical records stored in the cloud, sold on the open market. This is another case where the New York Times seems to be our main mouthpiece for things, about revealing the idea and the fact that patient data isn't as anonymous as people think it is. They think it's scrubbed, but this New York Times article points out that essentially all of these things are going to be available. The frightening thing, it ties in with what we're even going to perhaps call our fourth story, is that it can tie in with microchipping. So all your information available, you know it's going to be harvested, you know it's going to be sold, and it's involving third-party vendors and entering into this kind of Minority Report type world.
Absolutely, yeah. The fourth story obviously coming from bnet.com and involving microchipped health record, microchipping implants to store health records and correlate that with other personal data. And yes, this does all source back to a New York Times article that was about the idea of electronic privacy, and of course we know there is no such thing in this increasingly connected world. So definitely I hope people will check out episode 103, the Corbett Report, where we talk about the smart grid and why this is not a good thing. And also in the related information for today's video, I'll post direct links to all these stories, and of course to the last episode of MediaMonarchy.com podcast, because if you're not listening to MediaMonarchy.com, then you're not informed. All right, so James, again, it's too much to possibly cover in 10 minutes, but people have got to check out the sites. So thank you once again for coming here and doing this.
Thanks so much, man. Take care.